Hello everyone, and welcome to this video lecture exploring the medium essay assignment. So the name medium here does not refer to the length of the project, although in some ways I suppose it is a medium-lengthed essay. The name medium here is medium as in the title for a website. So we've spoken a lot this semester about audience and rhetorical situation and genre. You might be more familiar with the terms discourse community and community of practice. So, if we think about the medium project, what we're doing with this project is we're changing the discourse community that we're writing to. Or more specifically, really, because we're not changing so much the discourse community, we're changing the audience. If you think about the writing that you did in your scholarly writing module, you were writing for an audience of scholars, of discourse community members, but also discourse community members in the sense that they were practitioners, people who are reading and writing about this topic at the scholarly level in a scholarly way. What we're doing now is we're shifting our audience from a group of knowledgeable professional peers to what we might call a general public audience. Now, before we get into that too much, I want to say something pretty directly here. There's no such thing as a general public. When we say public, what we really mean is a group of people bound together by some kind of shared stakes, some kind of shared investment in a social structure or a political system or a culture, a group of people that we can identify as working together, bounded by something that's non professional or non work oriented in nature. Um, so civic society might be a civil society, or civic organizations might be an example of a public audience. People who live in the same geographical region are bounded by geography. People who are interested in, to an extent, the same sports team, maybe. That would be more of a discourse community, I suppose, but not really. Yeah, that's not a discourse community. That would also be a public audience. So a readership here of people who are interested in your topic based on their belonging to a public type of group. So, a public type of group, right, is something that's not exclusive. So, think about discourse community writing, particularly scholarly writing for a scholarly discourse community. What are some of the modes of exclusion? We have peer review. To publish in those journals, you need to go through peer review. Public writing doesn't have that. It will usually be reviewed by an editor because that's a function of publication, just in order to proofread and assure that the topic selection and source use is appropriate for the audience. But an editorial decision to publish is very different than a peer review in the academic sense, where a group of scholars with academic credentials are working together to create knowledge. Public writing doesn't really seek to create knowledge, scholarly writing does. Public writing might seek to raise awareness of an issue that affects a broad group of people. It might seek to impact public policy by persuading people to support a certain cause or approach to solving a problem. It might seek to entertain and inform in order to just pass time. But public writing necessarily appeals to an audience based on something other than a professional sense of obligation. So, what we mean there is with scholarly writing, for instance, you have to read it if you're part of a scholarly community. If your work involves uh, producing knowledge and being current in your field, you need to be aware of what's happening in your field. You need to publish or perish, as the expression goes. If you're writing for a community of practice, you need to engage with your peers to refine the knowledge about how you do what you do and to work together to refine and better understand what you do. Again, that's a professional obligation. So when we say public writing or public audience, what we really mean is something other than discourse community in the scholarly sense or community of practice in the professional sense. And again, some traditional types of public writing might be a political campaign, a social issue. Those of you studying social entrepreneurship, this is right up your alley. So that kind of non-professional, non-scholarly writing. Now, common misconception is that to write for a public audience, you have to dumb it down. In other words, the general public is way I know I said it doesn't exist. The public audience is not as knowledgeable as the scholarly audience, so we have to dumb it down. That's not true at all. You might have to explain jargon or key concepts. You might have to relate some discourse community specific knowledge to a public audience that they might be unfamiliar with, and that's work that falls on your shoulders as the writer of a public piece. But you don't have to dumb it down. Now, yes, your readership here will be much more diverse and varied than a discourse community or community of practice specific publication. But for this assignment, you should assume a readership of educated, invested public readers. So basically, think of like your classmates who aren't studying exactly what you're studying, someone else who might be in the same college but not with the same focus, or even someone also at the same learning level but not in the same college would be actually probably a little bit better. So you're imagining someone who's an invested, interested reader, but who might not know your particular technical jargon or key concepts or be current in the literature of your field. So, okay, there's the background for the audience shift that we have going on here. How does this show up in your assignment? Let's go over the nuts and bolts of this, the stuff that you really care about here. So, 1,500 words. That's approximate. It could be a little longer. It could be a little shorter, depending on how you approach it. Online artifacts dimension 10 to 15. So, what you're going to see here is that in these medium assignments, and I have some samples that we can look at in a second video, you're going to see that what we're doing is we're really working with internet sources in order to explain them and analyze them, close read them, the same way that you deal with textual evidence, quotation evidence, and scholarly writing. And we're seeking to show how our topic is represented in what we call public discourse. So if you were studying, say, supply chain, how does something related to supply chain get discussed in the public sphere? Well, that's going to be tough, right? The first thing you have to realize is you're never going to see the phrase supply chain. Rarely will you see supply chain discussed in the public sphere, right? So we have to think about specific elements of it. Say, for instance, let's call it warehouse storage, right? Where do you see warehousing discussed in the public arena? Real estate or land discussions, working and labor regulations. So how do these issues show up in the news? Well, you have stories about, for instance, workers in Amazon warehouses and how they're treated. You have questions of technology displacing manual human labor. You have questions of international trade and tariffs and how that might impact prices of goods. So what you have to really think about here is how does what you are studying show up in the current topics in public awareness, in the news? How is it represented? So the challenge is going to be picking part of what you're studying and exploring that in a public way and relating to that public conversation that's playing out across media platforms related to what you're doing. So, okay, I'm going to go through the assignment sheet here and just get that out of the way, or else I'm going to ramble forever. Purpose. This assignment positions you to explore the relationship between public discourse and technological mediums. Considering conversations across mediums and platforms, you'll investigate online conversations related to your inquiry question. You'll learn to read the visual rhetoric of online content, relate social media conversations to more serious discourse community or COP conversations, and you'll learn to apply academic research skills to non-academic sources. Finally, you'll adapt your academic work to a public audience. So, what are you going to do? First, you're going to surf the internet and identify an ongoing conversation of some public importance as evidenced through widespread public engagement. So what does that look like? It looks like if you go to a Google search, and I'm going to vanish for a minute here, and if we Google, let's call it, I said supply chain, let's call it warehouse worker conditions, and you search Google for this, okay? And then we go to news. What do we get in news? We get a Vox article, why Amazon pays warehouse worker employees to tweet about their jobs, what it's like to work in Amazon fulfillment center. So you see Amazon right away, top 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'm really curious, 9, 10. Okay, so Amazon clearly is dominating this conversation. All right, let's say that you're more interested in technology replacing human labor. You could type in something like technology replacing jobs. Most people would rather lose their job to a robot than another human. That's an interesting idea. 17% of psychiatrists see technology replacing humans. Okay. So what's interesting about these results, which is a little bit, so it's a little bit more broad than the warehouse worker conditions, which clearly Amazon better get its stuff together. Um, what you see here really is that there are a lot of different ways to discuss technology replacing jobs. And you can consider this from a lot of different ways. You could investigate, for instance, if you're going to look at this, we could look also at like movies about cyborgs or something like that. And if we go to all results, what do we get? It's a fine film. I saw that in my younger days. Um, Goofy, right? How is artificial intelligence depicted in film, in popular culture? So you could even say popular culture, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, popular culture. What do we get? Notice you get scholarly articles from Google Scholar, first of all, but you could also then go to news and we can get how is AI represented in culture? What does it look like? And from there, we can say, oh, there's a trend. People are worried about the morality of it. For instance, this article here, it's not evil, but the new electricity, or they freak me out. So, how do people respond to it? And how does that relate to something you're studying? What you would do is you would assemble some of these news sources, and of course, you could also use fictional text, movies, TV shows, books, and you could say, here are representations of artificial intelligence. Here's what artificial intelligence actually looks like. How is it sensationalized? Why is it sensationalized this way? What do these sensationalizations say about how we have anxiety about losing our stability as workers and as members of a fundamentally human social unit? These are all ways to think about it. So going back to the assignment sheet then, um, you're going to see what we would call widespread public engagement a couple ways. One, how many search results come up when you click that news tab? Are they from a variety of news sources? Do you have television stations, radio stations, newspapers, blogs? What variety of sources are represented? What of publication platforms? Do you see a lot of user comments about it? If there's something on social media that people are talking about, by all means, bring in social media posts and say, here's how on social media people are discussing working conditions. It's a huge topic right now, obviously, because of politics. So we can glean public attitudes from a lot of different ways. And what we're trying to do here again is report on how our research topic, our inquiry question, is discussed by the public. I am researching topic X with inquiry question, whatever it is. What does this look like if I take it out of the scholarly domain and I put it in the public sphere and we try to have a public conversation about it? So, your job as the composer in this project are really twofold. One, you need to report on that public conversation. What does it look like? How does it happen? What platforms are most prominent? Two, what are people saying and how can you help kind of direct that conversation and use your expert knowledge to inform the public somehow, persuade them, show them an issue that might demand their attention in some sort of a public capacity. These are all different approaches you can take to this assignment, and it's really up to you based on your topic. Um, what are you going to do then? I should try to stay focused on that. Uh, Use your findings to compose a project for Medium.com. So, what is Medium? It taps into the brains of the world's most insightful writers, thinkers, and storytellers to bring you the smartest takes on topics that matter. So, whatever your interest, you can always find fresh thinking and unique perspectives. So, look at this: fresh thinking, unique perspectives. There's a common theme there. It's your idea. What's your idea about your topic, the conversation that you are participating in? We identified this in Module 1 with the discourse communities. We've entered that conversation via the proposal. We've learned about it via the annotated bibliography. We've written about it via the research synthesis. So we're all in a position now to enter this public conversation with some degree of knowledge that most members of the public don't have. So, how do we kind of use our knowledgeable powers for good? How do we provide a meaningful public debate on a pressing issue? How do we guide and inform a public readership? These are the questions that you're going to have to consider in this assignment. So, one of the things you're going to see that's really key is topic selection. You really have to hone in on something that makes your project interesting, something what's your idea, and then you're going to have to explain it through analyzing particular sources online. So, what are some, go back to the way we thought about text in Module 1. What are some of the discourse community practices But instead of saying discourse community, what are some of the traits of this conversation that's happening in public? Is it emotional? Is it logical? Are people biased? Are people inquisitive? Are people sensational? How do participants tend to engage in this conversation in the public sphere? Look for some of the traits of their writing that clue you into it, and that's one of the kind of ways to analyze it. So I'm going to wrap this video up here because I know it's getting a little bit long. And I just want to emphasize really quickly at the end that public audiences do not encounter text with the sense of institutional obligation. That's that discourse community stuff. There's no professional reason why a public reader has to read this, right? They might encounter it when they're probably going to encounter it on a phone, maybe a laptop, when they're on the T, when they're stuck in traffic. Don't text and drive. Um, that's when we read all this stuff a lot of the time, or if you're just sitting at home spacing out watching TV. That's how we encounter these public conversations. And that's the conversation that we want to describe and enter into. So I do have some sample projects that I'm going to go over, and that's going to be in a separate video for the sake of technological ease and everything else going on. Have a good one.